I welcome the first speaker, Mercedes.
Yes.
And
Do her bio.
read all her bio.
Yeah.
And she comes here.
Yes. Perfect. Yep.
But they can stay there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Hi. Good morning, everyone. So it is now 11:02.
Hello.
So we kindly ask that everyone come back in the room so we start our first technical session. Good morning once more. We're about to start our first technical discussion on pathways to blue carbon accreditation, navigating the standards. So I please invite you all to sit so we can start. All right, so I now introduce my colleague, Tatiana Watson, who will be moderating this panel and will introduce you all to our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya, and good morning, everybody. My name is Tatiana Watson. I'm a project management expert at the IDB's Biodiversity and Natural Capital Unit. And we have been working with DEFRA and with all the team leaders from the IDB and the executing agencies in the development of this UK Blue Carbon Fund. And today I'm very happy to be moderating this first panel and the first conversation of the conference that is called Pathways to Blue Carbon Accreditation.
Esta sesión se llama Trayectorias hacia la acreditación de carbono azul y cómo manejar los estándares. Hemos hablado mucho del potencial del carbono azul, pero ¿cómo hacemos para ir de una idea de restaurar un sitio a créditos de carbono azul con credibilidad? Primeramente, vamos a hablar de las oportunidades que existen en América Latina y el Caribe. Mercedes nos va a ayudar un poco con su presentación en este sentido. Luego vamos a hablar de los estándares. Esta presentación estará a cargo de Vera, líder mundial en estándares medioambientales. Y ellos nos van a hablar de cómo han elaborado el estándar. Y luego, por último, vamos a hablar de lecciones aprendidas y resultados en cuanto a decodificar o descifrar el mercado voluntario de carbón de un país que ha tenido éxito en este sentido, que es Colombia, con el aporte del señor Francisco Arias. Comenzamos con la presentación de Mercedes Fernández. Mercedes es abogada medioambiental, se especializa en política de cambio climático y regulación. Tiene más de 20 años de experiencia profesional. Su trabajo se ha enfocado sobre todo en América Latina y en África, donde ha apoyado a clientes en cuanto a temas legales y regulatorios sobre la Convención de Cambio Climático de la ONU. Su pericia incluye marcos legales, regulatorios, análisis estructural de marcos nacionales, artículo 6, mercados voluntarios de carbono y multas. En cuanto a las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, fue coautora de iniciativas de Red Plus, colaborando con elaboradores de política y contribuyó a elaborar evaluaciones para financiación de proyectos de clima bajo un proyecto del Banco Mundial en el Congo. También tiene mucha experiencia en mercados de carbón, incluyendo trabajo en cuanto a la estrategia de acceso al mercado de carbono voluntario y la iniciativa de integridad, y ha elaborado orientaciones para promover mercados voluntarios en Yucatán y la región amazónica. Es asesora sobre transacciones en mercados de carbono y ofrece servicios de asesoría y capacitación bajo transacciones del artículo 6 y estrategias regulatorias para mercados de carbono en varios países. Bienvenida, Mercedes, que nos va a hablar de trayectorias hacia la acreditación de mercados de carbono azul en América Latina y el Caribe.
Thank you, Tatiana.
Gracias, Tatiana.
So, thank you to everybody.
Y bien,
Good morning.
gracias a todos. Muy buenos
buenos
días.
días.
Muy buenos días.
Not sure whether the French
Good morning.
speakers, so just in
No
case.
sé si
Bonjour à
hay
tous y bon dia.
colegas
So,
de habla
I'm very
francesa.
happy to be
Si
here.
es el
It's my
caso,
first time in
bonjour a
Trinidad and
todos. Es un
Tobago.
placer estar aquí con ustedes. Es la primera vez que estoy aquí en Trinidad
Especially
y Tobago.
delighted because I'm
Me
between
complace mucho
scientists. I'm among
porque
scientists
yo
and researchers,
soy,
which at the end of the day,
estoy entre científicos
you
e
guys are the
investigadores
most important
y a fin de
actors
cuentas
in
para mí
my
ustedes son los
view
actores
in carbon
más
markets.
importantes, en
Without
mi opinión,
science, there is no
en los
credibility
mercados de
in carbon
carbono.
markets.
Sin ciencia,
Without your
los mercados de
research,
carbono no tienen
we,
credibilidad.
the rest
Sin
of the
su
actors,
investigación, nosotros, el resto de
carbon
los actores
developers,
de este campo,
international
elaboradores,
organizations, donors,
organizaciones
even lawyers,
internacionales,
even those
abogados,
lawyers who negotiate,
donantes,
carbon
hasta
transactions. This is
nosotros,
the
abogados,
boring
que
thing that
negociamos las
sometimes,
transacciones. Es la
or
parte
frequently I do,
aburrida
you could
que
not do,
yo a menudo
anything. So I
participo en esas
prepared a very, very
negociaciones.
brief
Sin
presentation.
ustedes no podremos hacer nada. He elaborado
My
una presentación
objective
bastante breve
is, first of all,
y
give
mi
you some
objetivo
general
sería
ideas
primeramente darles
about where
compartir ideas
carbon
generales
markets, blue
sobre
carbon stand today,
el
what are
estatus
the main
actual
challenges
de los mercados de
for
carbono azul,
blue
cuáles son los
carbon,
desafíos
what
principales
are the
para el carbono
opportunities as
azul,
well in
cuáles
Latin
son las
America,
oportunidades que existen
and of
en
course
América Latina.
several, let's
Y por
say,
supuesto,
yes, ideas about
digamos,
how
varias
especially
ideas
governments
sobre
can
cómo
advance with
se
blue
puede
carbon. It's not easy.
salir adelante
But also
con
how
los créditos azules, sobre todo para los
which,
gobiernos
we know that
y
this event is,
también para los bancos multilaterales de desarrollo.
supported by IDB,
Como sabemos, esta
how
iniciativa cuenta con el
multilateral
apoyo
development
del BID,
banks or
pero cómo los
international
bancos
NGOs or
multilaterales de
donors
desarrollo,
can
los
support
ONG,
project
de desarrollo
developers and at the
internacionales
end of the
pueden
day, countries to
apoyar a quienes
advance
elaboran
in blue
proyectos y a los países a
needless to
seguir
say, I would
adelante
like
con el carbono azul.
thank
Quisiera, antes de comenzar de lleno, agradecer a quienes han organizado esta conferencia. Tatiana, mi objetivo es ser muy breve porque lo más importante es el debate después. Así que, bueno, comienzo a ver si esto funciona.
Okay, let me see. Good. So,
bien.
Very, very briefly.
Muy
so what we will do, the agenda
rápidamente.
is,
Vamos a ver.
is actually 6
La agenda
pages,
de la
no more than that.
presentación son
And
6
as I said before,
diapos
we
nada
will
más.
check what are the
No más.
opportunities on blue carbon in Latin
Vamos a hablar
America,
de las
what are the
oportunidades para
specific
el
challenges.
Carbono azul
Talking
en
about,
América
of course, these
Latina y el
specific
Caribe,
challenges,
los desafíos específicos en cuanto a los proyectos, y todo esto se basa en mi experiencia trabajando con las comunidades, con quienes han diseñado proyectos de carbono azul, en su mayoría impulsados por las comunidades, lo cual es muy difícil. Y luego vamos a quizás pensar en un mapa de ruta para gobiernos, para organizaciones internacionales que desean apoyar ese tipo de proyectos. Y creo que las veces es algo muy bien. ¿Dónde estamos hoy por hoy en este sentido? Los créditos de carbono, de proyectos de carbono azul, son un porcentaje muy pequeño de los créditos de carbono que están siendo emitidos por los estándares de carbono. ¿Cuál es el área que piensan que domina? Manglares son los que representan la mayoría de los créditos. Y con los mercados, ¿qué está ocurriendo? A fin de cuentas, es que hay mucha demanda altísima, muchísimos compradores. Y acá me refiero a compradores privados que están comprando carbono azul, créditos para compensar y también para realizar contribuciones al clima. Es decir, no solamente para compensar, sino para apoyar a las metas de clima. Y el problema que tienen es que no encuentran proyectos de carbono azul. Y es por ello que los precios son tan altos, al menos en comparación con otros proyectos de carbono. Acá menciono 2030, pero
And I have seen this year
Hablo de
a
2030,
project
pero alguien acá
already
mencionó $40
selling right now at
y hay un
almost
proyecto que
50
conozco que está vendiendo a
and
casi
future carbon
50
projects
y proyectos
that will be
futuros de
sold at
carbono
60
que van a
from the same
venderse
project.
a 60
Okay,
del
we are
mismo
talking about
proyecto.
US dollars, but the reality
En
is
dólares
that
americanos.
there are
Pero la
very, very
realidad
few of these
es que hay
carbon projects,
pocos
and that shows
proyectos de
that
carbono
one of the
azul
main challenges is
y
to
eso
scale up.
demuestra que
How from
uno de los
this very,
grandes
very
desafíos
tiny,
es
we
ampliar
reach,
la escala,
let's say,
cómo ir de una iniciativa muy pequeñita a
much more
una
offer in
escala
terms of blue carbon credits.
que permita
In
mucha
terms of
más
geographical
oferta
distribution,
en créditos.
the thing
En
is that the
cuanto a
full
la distribución
issuance of carbon credits is
geográfica,
right now
la
dominated
emisión
by
de créditos de
Pakistan,
carbono en este
if I'm
momento la
correct.
domina Pakistán,
Why is
si no
that?
me
Because they have a
equivoco.
very
¿Y por qué?
big one of
Porque
huge blue carbon
cuentan
project.
con un proyecto de
Within the
carbono azul
within the main
Y,
countries using
entre los principales países
carbon, credits from carbon,
trabajan con
there are not
créditos de carbono,
Latin
pero el
American
carbono
countries.
azul no hay
It doesn't mean
muchos
that they are not
latinoamericanos o del
using
Caribe.
blue carbon
No quiere
projects.
decir
There
que
are
no
some carbon
hayan
projects in
proyectos de carbono
Colombia.
azul en
There
la
are
región,
other
porque hay
carbon
algunos
projects
en
as well that
Colombia,
are generating carbon
hay
credits
otros
from,
que están
for instance,
generando
in Mexico,
créditos
that go
de
to
carbono
the CARB,
en
one,
México,
American standard. They exist,
que
but
van
still
a CAR,
they
que
are
es la
very,
norma
very cheap.
estadounidense. Existen, pero son muy pocos.
Let's see. Okay, so what are the opportunities
Y bien,
for blue carbon in
¿Qué
Latin America?
oportunidades existen para el
Of
carbono
course,
azul en América
after
Latina?
What we heard today, what we have seen in the previous
Luego
slide,
de
it's clear
todo lo
that
que
there
hemos
is a
hablado el
lot
día
of
de hoy, de la
potential
diapositiva
for blue
anterior,
carbon in
queda
Latin
claro
America.
que hay mucho potencial para el carbono azul
Countries in
en
the
América
region,
Latina.
you are all working very
El
hard, but
Caribe,
there is still
ustedes como
many
países de la
things to do,
región
many things to
trabajan
do,
de
many
forma
possibilities to
bastante
explore.
ardua en este
Something
sentido,
that
pero aún
is
quedan
important
muchas
for you to know,
oportunidades que se pueden explorar.
for countries,
Y algo
for
muy
multilateral
importante
development,
que deben tener en cuenta como
organizations.
países y organizaciones
Blue carbon,
multilaterales,
and this is a good thing,
el
has
carbono
not
azul,
been
y esto me
affected
parece
so
muy
far
positivo,
by
no se ha
environmental
visto
integrity
muy
elements.
afectado hasta
You might know
ahora
that in the carbon
por el
market there
tema
were
de
many
integridad
news
medioambiental.
over the
Saben
last
que en
years,
los
especially
mercados
related
de
with
carbono en los últimos años
red
han habido
projects,
muchas
deforestation
noticias,
projects, not only,
en particular en cuanto a
also
red,
projects like cooking
proyectos
stoves,
de reforestación,
that basically
proyectos de cocinas,
show that those projects
y hay datos que
were not real. This caused a lot of reputation to those type of projects. Blue carbon has not been affected so far by this,
el carbono azul no se ha visto afectado, pero no quiere decir que eso no vaya a ocurrir en un futuro. Y es importante tener esto en cuenta. El papel de ustedes como científicos es vital en este sentido, porque si la ciencia es robusta, quiere decir que se cuenta con metodologías robustas que le da al mercado credibilidad. Y por alguna razón, los inversores, los compradores que invierten en proyectos de carbono se dejan guiar mucho por la reputación de un país. Un país hizo algo malo en el pasado y automáticamente se les considera que ya no son confiables en cuanto a integridad ambiental. Entonces, por eso es tan importante siempre utilizar las bases científicas más robustas que puedan, siempre hacer lo correcto. Y como les mencioné, mucha demanda, poco suministro. Los inversores están buscando proyectos y los países tienen que encontrar la manera de aumentar la escala y apoyar este tipo de proyectos de carbono. Y creo que ya hoy se mencionó y en los próximos días continuaremos hablando al respecto. Los países de América Latina están avanzando mucho, a veces con el apoyo de ciertos donantes o ciertas iniciativas como el BID, países como Costa Rica, Panamá, Belice, Colombia. Y me quedan 5 minutos nada más. No es justo. No es justo. Y en cuanto al tema científico, sumamente importante, ya existen metodologías, las metodologías de carbono azul. No voy a hablar al respecto ahora porque esa fue lo que se cubrió en la presentación anterior, pero el desafío es aterrizar esas metodologías en las características específicas de sus países, en sus respectivos contextos, y aún no hemos llegado allí. Ese es el desafío que como países, como organizaciones internacionales van a tener que abordar ustedes, asegurarse que las metodologías se nutran de sus datos nacionales locales. Y es lo que ocurre con los otros créditos de carbono, red tan famoso, etcétera. Y es algo que requiere inversión y para lo cual van a necesitar apoyo. Desafíos específicos, como mencioné hace un momento, comprender el ciclo de los proyectos y las metodologías. Muy importante. A menudo uno habla con los gobiernos sobre carbono azul y nos sorprende que no entienden las particularidades del carbono azul en comparación con otros proyectos de carbono. Es vital entender que todos lo entiendan. Hay pocas maneras 100% acertadas para verificar el carbono azul y hay que entender los motores de impulso. Una evaluación de motores de impulso y es muy difícil lograrlo de forma correcta. Analizar los proyectos, análisis de motores de avance y en general esos motores son débiles y es por eso que aumentar la escala de los proyectos es tan difícil. Se comienza con proyectos muy pequeños y los gobiernos tienen que permitir un enfoque a nivel de toda la jurisdicción, una escala mucho más grande. Coordinar instituciones, como se imaginarán, es un desastre. Países todos tienen distintos niveles de gobierno, nacional, regional, comunitario, derechos comunitarios, para garantizar que todo esté bien organizado, que todos los actores participan y que se adopten las políticas adecuadas. Y este es un tema legal con el que yo trabajo mucho. Los regímenes de tenencia de tierras solapados, eso es un gran desastre con los proyectos de carbono azul. El hecho de que a menudo no hay mapeo, que a veces la superficie le pertenece a una cierta entidad, pero no se sabe lo que ocurre con lo que está bajo el agua. Muy sencillo. Muy importante también demostrar la adicionalidad, demostrarla cuando se está elaborando un documento que vayan a presentar como documentación de la metodología y las distintas políticas que se aplican a una misma área. Esta mañana se mencionó que muchos proyectos de carbono azul están en áreas protegidas y eso afecta mucho un aspecto de las metodologías, que es la permanencia. Entonces, la adicionalidad, la permanencia están muy ligados. Lástima que la persona de veras no está acá porque habría muchas preguntas que les podríamos hacer sobre los desafíos que enfrentan los países. Acceso a financiación de carbono. Los créditos de carbón usualmente requieren mucha financiación, pero el carbono azul sobre todo para la restauración. Y esto es cada vez más pertinente porque el carbono azul es tan vital y nos hacen falta muchos datos. A menudo son datos que están en los laboratorios, es decir, mayor colaboración entre quienes elaboran los proyectos y quienes realizan las investigaciones, las personas que trabajan en los laboratorios. Esa colaboración es vital. 2 minutos me quedan, 1 minuto. Estoy yendo muy rápido. Como se dan cuenta, estoy hablando muy rápido, los españoles hablamos muy rápido, pero bueno, continúo. ¿Cómo pueden los gobiernos adoptar acción decisiva para seguir adelante con el carbono azul? Primeramente, algo que decimos mucho, pero no es fácil, garantizar que el carbono azul esté en sus planes nacionales. Crear bases de datos específicas en sus respectivos países sobre carbono azul y metodologías de carbono azul. Es vital que esas metodologías estén bien adaptadas a la particularidad de sus contextos. Y luego ciertas iniciativas en América Latina, sea carbono, que es una iniciativa que es un buen ejemplo, un estándar que es bastante adecuado a América Latina y el Caribe. Y luego piensen en enfoques nacionales o quizás un gobierno adopta ese enfoque para su jurisdicción y luego busca que los otros proyectos se integren a ese marco. Lo importante es que la métrica y la contabilización se hagan bien y eso solo se logra a nivel de la jurisdicción para evitar problemas de integridad medioambiental. Y no veo al representante de colega, pero le tenía una pregunta que le quería hacer en otra oportunidad. Los países que estén acá, no sé cuáles ya están avanzando con este tema, pero los países que están explorando enfoques cooperativos bajo el artículo 6.2, colaboración entre un país inversor y un país que vende bajo el acuerdo. Allí hay muchas oportunidades para incluir el carbono azul allí y nadie lo menciona, es a través de las transacciones. Hasta donde yo sé, no hay transacciones con el carbono azul, pero es posible. Hay algunos países compradores como Corea, sí, si no me equivoco, y Singapur.
Respecting the rules. Very good. Thank you. No, thank you, Mercedes. And there is a word that resonates with me from the conversation of Carlos and your presentation, and is how do we scale? And we have like to scale these initiatives, these projects, but before we are like building a process that takes time. And for that, I want to highlight from your presentation that roles are very important to be defined. And for example, how governments should understand this better, the characteristics and specific characteristics of blue carbon credits and projects, and how the communities are involved and those co-benefits you are mentioning, and also how the scientific knowledge and institutions play a key role. So thank you again, Mercedes. And now let us dive into one of the standards, the Verra standard. Unfortunately, our speaker, Liz Guinessey, the manager of Food and Blue Carbon Innovation at Verra, could not join us in person, but still wanted to contribute on these discussions. Liz Guinessey is manager of the Verified Carbon Standard VCS program development at Verra, where she works on developing updates on this specific VCS program. The VCS program is the world's most widely used greenhouse gas crediting program, driving finance toward activities that reduce and remove emissions, improve livelihoods, and protect nature. In addition to working on updates on the VCS program, Guinessey coordinates and provides technical input to the development of VCS methodologies for natural climate solutions, including the conservation and restoration of blue carbon ecosystems. With a background in ecology and environmental science, she brings expertise in greenhouse gas accounting and methodology development. Before joining Verra, she worked in nonprofit roles implementing conservation projects on the ground. Liz has pre-recorded her presentation on navigating the Verra standards for you today. So we welcome her presentation that will be projected. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Liz Guinessey, and I am the manager of VCS program development at Verra. And I am very excited to be chatting with you all today about navigating Verra standards programs. Specifically, I'll get into opportunities for blue carbon within the VCS program, and then also some beyond carbon certification opportunities as well. Here's a little overview of the different topics that I will cover, including getting into our blue carbon methodologies, some of the specific methodological components within those methodologies. I'll touch on our pipeline of blue carbon projects at Verra, and then I will also discuss some beyond carbon and emerging opportunities for blue carbon. Verra is a nonprofit organization that sets standards to track progress towards achieving climate goals, sustainable development goals, among others. This slide here shows the various programs that Verra operates. So I will mostly talk about the Verified Carbon Standard, or the VCS program today. This is the world's largest voluntary greenhouse gas program. Verra also operates the Climate, Community, and Biodiversity Standard, or CCB. This standard can be used to track progress towards achieving co-benefits beyond carbon. We operate a plastic waste reduction standard, which incentivizes entities to reduce their plastic waste through recycling. We also operate the jurisdictional and nested RED framework, which essentially is a program for jurisdictional accounting of decreases in deforestation. And then finally, we operate the Sustainable Development Verified Impact Standard, or SD-VISTA. This standard can be used to track progress towards achieving different Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but blue carbon is a very important resource. Blue carbon refers to carbon that is captured and stored by the ocean and coastal ecosystems. Mangroves, tidal marshes, and seagrass sequester and store more carbon per unit area than terrestrial forests. These ecosystems also provide really critical co-benefits, including things like coastal protection from storms, food security for communities that live around these wetland systems, and they can also contribute to improved water quality. In light of how important these systems are, Vera has several opportunities to really try to incentivize the conservation and restoration of wetland systems. In addition to these coastal wetland systems, Vera is also exploring the development of different opportunities to support emerging open ocean activities, such as seabed protection and seaweed farming. Vera has a set of wetland restoration and conservation requirements, or WRC requirements, which actually enable the crediting of restoration and conservation activities in wetland systems. These requirements apply to all projects in wetland ecosystems, not only those considered to be blue carbon. They include things like accounting for ecological leakage, which is defined as changes in greenhouse gas emissions from ecosystems that are hydrologically connected to the project area, among other innovations. And so now I'd like to get into some of the specific details around the blue carbon methodologies that are available under the Verified Carbon Standard program. Vera has VM7, which is a RED methodology framework. This methodology applies to conservation activities in tidal wetland systems, such as mangroves, seagrasses, and tidal marsh. It includes procedures to quantify net emission reductions from conservation activities. Vera also has VM33, or the methodology for tidal wetland and seagrass restoration, available for projects to use. This methodology applies to restoration activities taking place in tidal wetlands, again in mangroves, tidal marsh, and seagrass. This methodology includes procedures to quantify net emission reductions and removals resulting from project activities implemented to restore these systems. And so these methodologies both share some similar components, which are really critical to ensuring the integrity of the quantification of benefits, the transparency of those benefits, among other things. And so over the next couple of slides, I'm just going to touch on how we treat some of these methodological components within the methodologies that I just mentioned. And so first, additionality. The demonstration of additionality is a very key element of any carbon project. Projects must demonstrate that their activities go beyond business as usual and actually require the carbon finance in order to take place. Both of the blue carbon methodologies use a positive list for the demonstration of additionality, or that that project activity is beyond business as usual. This is a type of standardized method where essentially any project activity that complies with the applicability conditions of the methodology is deemed to be additional. The positive list is based on very low global adoption rates of blue carbon conservation and restoration activities. When taking into account the global area of these systems, there was an analysis done that shows how very few of these systems are actively being conserved or restored relative to their global coverage. Another really critical methodological component is ensuring the permanence of carbon stocks that are being conserved or restored within a carbon project, and in particular in these blue carbon projects. Verra assesses non-permanence risk through an AFALU non-permanence risk tool, or NPRT. This tool only applies to greenhouse gas removals or avoided emissions through carbon sinks. Essentially, the tool is used to determine a risk rating, and then this risk rating in turn determines the number of buffer credits that a project must deposit into the AFALU pooled buffer account. This risk analysis considers things like internal risks, such as the financial viability of the project. It considers external risks like land and resource tenure or ownership of the area where the project is being implemented. And then finally, it also considers natural risks, such as the impacts of sea level rise on the carbon stocks within the project area. Another important methodological component is ecological leakage. I mentioned this earlier, but this is a type of leakage that can occur when a project activity causes emissions in ecosystems that are hydrologically connected to the project area. Blue carbon projects at the VCS must account for ecological leakage by either designing the project to actually ensure that the hydrological connectivity doesn't increase emissions elsewhere. If that is not possible, then projects must estimate emissions due to any hydrological changes in adjacent areas and include that into the net accounting for the project. All Verra methodologies have MRV pieces included within them. This refers to monitoring, reporting, and verification. In terms of monitoring expectations for blue carbon projects, they must monitor several carbon pools and other parameters using very scientifically rigorous methods. All blue carbon projects must monitor the soil organic carbon pool. These projects must also monitor the above and below ground biomass pools. And in addition, projects must also measure and monitor parameters that can influence greenhouse gas fluxes, such as water levels and salinity. There are reporting requirements for all blue carbon projects at Verra. Essentially, all monitoring data must be compiled into a monitoring report. These reports need to include very detailed records of how the methodology is being applied to the project. These reports must also include geospatial data with information on project boundaries, on sampling plot locations, and GIS layers where possible. And then these reports also include calculation tables, which must include carbon stock changes. They must assess any differences between baseline and project performance. And then these tables also quantify the resulting reductions and removals that are the result of the project activities being implemented. And then verification is also a very important component of any project. Verification is done by independent third parties at Verra. These are called VVBs, or validation and verification bodies. VVBs must be accredited to Verra standards. These VVBs must perform on-site visits to actually confirm that the project activities are being implemented as described, and they also conduct interviews with any relevant project stakeholders during these visits. VVBs in turn provide verification reports to Verra, which Verra then assesses and makes a consideration based on whether or not to move forward to issuance with that project. I do just want to mention that Verra is advancing different digital MRV processes where methodologies like VM33, for example, are being integrated with digital reporting tools that can really automate data capture and validation. VM33 is actually fully available in a digital format on the Verra Project Hub. We are kind of at the early days of some of these digital MRV processes, but we're really trying to get into the digital era, and I anticipate that we will have a lot more digital offerings in the months and years to come. I do just want to mention that there are some planned revisions to Verra's blue carbon methodologies. So We are currently revising the VM33 methodology, and the main pieces of work for this revision process include first, incorporating conservation activities, which are currently covered in VM7, into VM33. We're also working to update methods to establish project baselines for mangrove ecosystems, and we're also working on including other general updates to reflect the latest scientific advancements. I do just want to mention a little bit on Verra's pipeline of blue carbon projects. So currently, under VM33, we have 43 projects in various stages of development, ranging from under development, so very early stages, all the way through to registered, where projects are fully registered with Verra and able to issue credits. These projects cover a pretty wide span of geographies, including places like India, Indonesia, Madagascar, Senegal. Under VM7, which includes, as of right now, blue carbon conservation and restoration projects, we have about 15 projects in various stages of development, again, ranging from under development to fully registered. These projects also cover a wide swath, including Colombia, Indonesia, and Mexico. Now, I just wanted to talk about some specific projects and give some examples related to them. Verra has a project called the Cispata Columbia Mangrove Project registered at the VCS. This was the first VCS blue carbon conservation project to ever get fully registered. This project is implemented by Conservation International and many local partners on the ground in Colombia. The project is targeting the reduction of unplanned mangrove deforestation, and it uses the VM7 methodology. The project is also coming out with many different co-benefits for any sort of local stakeholder. These benefits include ecotourism opportunities and also improved fishing practices. Another example of a project is the Virginia Seagrass Project. This project is undergoing validation right now. It is being implemented by the Nature Conservancy in the state of Virginia in the United States. This project is focusing on seagrass restoration, and it is in fact the world's largest eelgrass restoration project. It uses VM33, and it also provides several co-benefits, including nursery and spawning habitat for critical fishery species, and it is also helping to attenuate wave action and just reduce any potential impacts from storm events or other types of events that could cause damage to coastal areas. And now finally, I'd like to close out by just talking a little bit about some beyond carbon and other emerging opportunities at Verra. So first, just touching on some emerging opportunities, Verra has been looking into expanding what we cover into the ocean carbon space. We have a seaweed methodology under development. The development is being led by external stakeholders. Seaweed is a very important species that takes up a lot of carbon via photosynthesis. The methodology framework that is under development aims to quantify the impacts of seaweed carbonic activities, including seaweed farming. Verra also has an avoided bottom trawling methodology under development. Bottom trawling is a fishing practice that uses nets to catch marine species that live on or close to the seabed. This fishing practice has a very detrimental effect on marine ecosystems, despite providing over a quarter of fishery catches worldwide. The methodology focuses on avoided carbon dioxide emissions from the seafloor sediment through the limitation or the reduction of seafloor trawling. And now I would like to just touch on some beyond carbon certification opportunities for blue carbon. As I mentioned at the very beginning of my presentation, Verra has several programs to support projects in assessing and certifying positive environmental and social impact claims. We have the Climate, Community, and Biodiversity Standard, which can certify benefits to the climate, local communities, and the environment. This can be done by actually applying a label to any VCUs that are being generated by the project. That label is essentially a signal that the project has these co-benefits, which have also been assessed and certified. We also have the SD Vista standard, which can certify project contributions to SDGs. Similarly, there's an opportunity to apply a label under SD Vista to any VCU. I also do want to mention that we are in the final stages of releasing a coastal resilience methodology under the SD Vista standard. This methodology will actually quantify resilience benefits from both mangrove and tidal marsh projects. And that is all that I have for you today. I really appreciate your attention, and if anyone has any questions, please do feel free to reach out to the email address on the slide here. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, so this was Liz Guinessey from Vera Presentations. From that one, I would like to highlight the one thing she mentioned, that is scientifically rigorous methods. And this MRB project we are working on today, all of you, all of us, is depending a lot on the MRB, the monitoring, but these scientifically rigorous methods define a lot on these carbon credits. I think you, Captain, will explain more about it, but the quality of the blue carbon credits depends a lot on that. So yeah, I thank a lot Liz for her presentation, and we've heard how it can be done. Now let's hear how it has been done. Here to share some experiences from Colombia is Captain Francisco Arias Izaza, General Director of the INVEMAR. Captain Arias is retired Navy captain, marine biologist, an expert in chemistry and biology from Jorge Tadeo Lozano University, Masters in Regional Development Planning and Management, DA in Coastal Management and from the University of Nantes, France, and PhD candidate in the Images and Sea program. He has served as director of the José Benito Vives de Andrés Marine and Coastal Research Institute INVEMAR since 1995, which has become the most important marine research entity in Colombia and one of the most recognized in Latin America. Welcome, Captain Francisco Arias Izaza, with your presentation on decoding the voluntary carbon market.
Thank you, Tatiana. How a huge challenge. It's the end of the morning and yeah, short of time. Let me say that it's about the fourth time I come to Trinidad. Always very glad to be here. It's always coinciding with carnival time. I don't know if that's why they gave me this sort of microphone. They maybe thought I was now trained as a performer here in Trinidad or something like that. So, looking at what have a challenging time and also the time before lunch, let's start by saying sorry. An introduction on how Colombia has been dealing with the voluntary markets of carbon. We defined a law back in 2016, Law 1819, which is a reformation of all the tax system in the country, and it included actually a system that allow enterprises and people who wanted to get into the issue of trading the impact of their footprint in terms of carbon into a tax system. This tax has been introduced in several ways in the way of doing business in Colombia. The tax is administered by the Ministry of Finance. It gives the companies and all those interested in an opportunity of getting alleviation in taxes while supporting the activities in terms of the reduction of a carbon footprint. The tax is also coordinated by the Ministry of Environment. That's actually what our institute works and helps into defining the science behind this and the checking of the impact and effectiveness of this. And let me say that it has been interesting for those projects in the tropical forests, in the continental part of the country, but blue carbon, coastal ecosystems, has been actually away from this. And it's not only a case in Colombia. I don't know if many of us recalls that actually mangroves and coastal marshes and all these ecosystems that we love were actually considered as producers of greenhouse gases, which is true when they are disturbed. But when they are conserved, they actually are more important in terms of the capacity of capturing greenhouse CO2, but also in retaining it. I always say that biogeological cycles in these ecosystems are so important and so effective that most of this excess of carbon that they can capture, it's frozen in time. It's directly converted into mineral, which almost never comes back to the atmosphere. Now, carbon pricing is now recognized as an important and, let's say, effective instrument to internalize the externalities and to mobilize primus finance towards the mitigation of the impact in the production of carbon. We've been working with the government, with our ministries, to certify carbon possibilities in the offset of taxes for the industry. We have designed a list of actions where projects can be eligible if they are based in nature-based solutions, such as reforestation, avoided reforestation, as the one that was mentioned a while ago, and mainly focused, and that's the case of INVEMAR, the institute where I work, into mangroves, actually. We're still moving into seagrasses and tidal marshes. We also have made a list of activities in terms of renewable energy, the methane capture capacity into waste management. There are projects, and we just talked about a little bit in the break in some activities that are moving to that. And of course, the changes in the way of how we use energy. But mangroves now, since we have made interesting advancements in terms of science behind the capacity of these ecosystems in capturing and retaining mangroves, we were able to tell the government to include mangroves as part of the national strategies in terms of our commitments with climate change mitigation strategies or of the climate change convention. We think that the potential of mangroves, in the case of Colombia, it's huge. We know now that the capacity of our mangrove areas in the Caribbean, it's very interesting in terms of the ecology of the system. We, as you know, we have also in the Pacific coast of Colombia, the largest mangrove coverage of the South American coast, except for maybe going into Central America, the Mexican coast. Colombia has the largest coverage of mangroves. And there we also play a role in terms of the co-benefits that these areas gives as a result of the strategies. We also, in terms of the responsibility from our government into the validity of the actions regarding the carbon voluntary market, we've been establishing a system to follow and to have transparency in terms of the activities and the projects that we will be promoting to be established in our coasts. We established different databases and systems to follow the way that it's evolving these actions. Of course, we are focusing in preventing those, let's say, non-transparent actions that might become, or maybe not even from lack of transparency, but the errors that we might encounter in this, to prevent double counting, to track the actual benefits and investments and the use of the credits, and of course, to cope with international standards. That's, of course, very important. So one of the things that we will actually feel very proud of, it's how we were able to be the first country into offering carbon credits in the voluntary market from mangrove areas. It was the first time in the world that a country could do that. And that was because we had sufficient science behind the areas that we were focusing into the definition of these possibilities. We actually started not as a carbon credit idea, but a need of financing a protected area. And you saw that from Vera last presentation, this area in the Caribbean coast of Colombia, which we call the Golfo de Morrosquillo, Bahía de Cispatá, it's the mouth of the Sinú River, midway in the long 1,600 kilometers coast of Caribbean coast in Colombia. We declared a protected area, and we had problems in maintaining the protection of this area. So we found out that avoiding deforestation and protecting communities and finding new ways of conserving this area was, of course, key for the success of the protected area, but also that it was possible to offer carbon credits from that strategy of protection, and that let's say interest in protecting the area was to be actually an opportunity to get into the carbon credits business. We moved into trying to have the certification. We tested different standards, different entities. South Pole was one, well, a number of them. And we finally got Vera involved. And we found out, and that's something that maybe the lady from Vera forgot to tell, is that there was no really standards for blue carbon, especially mangroves, and none, as maybe she did mention, in terms of other ecosystems. So we actually became part of a consortium into raising the capacity, the data, the standards to become a system to verify the capabilities of mangroves as sinks of carbon and maintaining the carbon. Then we moved also into the needs of having social, let's say, validation of our projects. And we thought that it was very important to get the civil society involved into the process. We talked and worked with local communities very strongly, but also with national NGOs and even official entities which are responsible for the management of these sort of transparency actions around the work of the institutions that are part of the government or institutions as INVEMAR who support the government into these decisions. And very interesting with academy. Academy was crucial support for us to give us data, to give us capacity to train scientists, and also from us to train scientists to do the work. So these, let's say, arrangements allowed us to have public information, to make public our information, but also to get information from the public, to have the independent scrutiny of our projects, which was very, very crucial in terms of transparency and the things that we wanted to show, and of course to protect community rights, the access and benefits from the project to the communities, and from there, we think we're moving to this very, very, let's say, ambitious projects of Colombia in regarding our national determined contribution. I would also like to mention that was part of Carlos Correa's from his time in the Ministry of Environment, in which Colombia committed to 51% reduction of the greenhouse gases by 2030, zero deforestation by 2030. This is really a tough thing, and carbon neutrality by 2050. So part of the strategy, it's now compromising the work in blue carbon, in mangrove areas, both Caribbean, Pacific, and starting to work with salt marshes and also seagrass beds, where we don't have still enough science. And from there, I will just jump into, it's called the pride of INVEMAR and the pride of Colombia in terms of blue carbon. And that's Vida Manglar project. Vida Manglar project, it's, as I mentioned, was the first project in the world able to sell 1 minute. Not too much. I will try to be responsible with that minute. Don't promise. We, as mentioned, we had this area that we wanted to protect. We knew a lot about the area, and that was why we wanted to protect the area. It's an interface, it's the delta of the Sinú River in the Caribbean coast of Colombia. Very interesting in terms of the transformation that this area has had in the last, I don't know, 80 years, running from, well, I would say even from the past. The Sinú indigenous people made canals back behind in the times where we didn't have even the Western intrusion in our continent. So it was an ecosystem that was heavily transformed, different ways. But in the last year, it was in a way of, let's say, flourishing mangrove ecosystems. And we had the data. We were studying from INVEMAR the effects of how do you call that, barrage in the high part of the river. It was a hydroelectrical project that changed the life system, the natural life system in the mouth of the river. So we were studying what were the effects of this construction up in the mountains. And so we had enough information to know what was going on there. What were the biological cycles of the species, what was happening to mangroves, what was the impact of this, especially this construction. And so we decided to protect this area, and as I mentioned, we needed money to maintain the system as a protected area. And so we moved in this idea of having possibility of selling carbon credits to co-finance the protection of the area. So we had the data, we had the will, which is the first part. We have a consortium of institutions interested, public institutions from the national level, the Ministry of Environment, from the local level, the environmental authority in the region. We had NGOs, CI, Conservation International, a local NGO, Fundación Omacha, and we had the science from INVEMAR. And most important, we have the agreement of the communities. We had their fishermen, we had, this is funny, we had crocodile hunters that were selling the skin of the crocodiles. We had people that lived from cutting down the mangrove to produce carbon and construction wood. So we were capable of arranging an agreement with all of these actors in the zone. And we went out to sell our first carbon credits. We thought it was interesting. Well, this was the first time in the world. By that time, the price of carbon credits were in Colombia around $7, $8, maybe 10 at the most. And we decided to open a bid. And the bid was successful. The first bid came with prices around 17 US. The buyers didn't want to be exposed too much, so they kind of told us, okay, we will put the money, but don't tell who we are. So we decided to stop selling one part of the possibilities. And finally, we reached to $40. We think that we still have a possibility of selling some more credits we might be reaching. And the results of the project, and I will be ending now, we expect to get around 1 million CO2 tons equivalent of over 30-year period. We have able to raise around $1 million US, which are mostly invested in transforming the activities of the local communities. For instance, those who are hunting crocodiles, I put this example, now they are raising crocodiles and having tourists taking the picture with the crocodile. So this is a recyclable crocodile, not as it used to be a dead crocodile. And I always put these examples because it has been very interesting. We have involved women in part of the business activities of the fishermen, transforming their activities for bird watching, ecotourism, and their wives and their families are now offering the lodging facilities for the people coming to the region. So this has not only changed their lives, having better results in their economic activities, but also protecting, involving community values. We have now special treats in terms of the food of the region, which people comes to taste and have fun for visiting the area, and some other activities that actually are alleviating the pressures that we had before in the system. Now, people are not cutting down the mangroves, but restoring the canals so we have more mangroves, more birds, more fishing, more fisheries, etc. So this has been a successful project. It's an example of how, if we have good science behind, we have the agreement between institutional communities and science, we can construct from there and have the best results. So I end here, and I hope that I gave the good information that you were waiting for me. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you, Captain, for this amazing presentation, showing the results of this process that took you a long time to get into real carbon credits, blue carbon credits. So thanks a lot for sharing that with us. We are going now to enter into the discussion and the panel. And for that, I don't know if we are going to use the QR code, or we can also share the questions, and I think we can make it more dynamic, and you can raise your hand and ask your questions. But I want to start the discussion with a general question, and is where to start if no groundwork has been done, but also where to start if we have some restoration or conservation projects being done in the ground and we want to go for this co-financing because we are understanding that this works as a co-financing, not the whole financing we need for conservation or restoration, but where to start if that work hasn't been done from your experience. And we can start with Mercedes.
Super difficult question. Where to start from? I mean, most of the carbon projects, the blue carbon projects, I know, depend of course a lot on funders, on investors. They are the ones that generally approach, search for, possible areas that could develop carbon projects. What I think is essential is that, of course, you first of all, depending on, how can I say, depends as well on which is the entity that has the idea, right? Whenever there is a community, and there are very few cases in which there are blue carbon projects launched by communities, very, very, very few cases, most of the times because in the coastal areas, land to a certain extent and sea areas belong to the government, belong to the state. There are state lands or there are some kind of land title to it. But of course, whenever communities want to launch a carbon project, this is something for which they need a lot of support. Who can support them? There are certain NGOs. I would say, for instance, I think you mentioned it as well, Francis, was the Conservation International does a great job in supporting carbon projects with communities. But not only, there are also international investors that are very eager to work with communities directly. What happens, of course, is that once someone has an idea about what, about the blue carbon project, the very first steps are very tough. First of all, there will be a kind of feasibility study. Then, even if this is a project launched by a community or by a, let's say, state entity, normally it's necessary the consensus of other entities, right? This is the most important thing, more than in a red or forest project. You see, there are many actors with whom you have to interact. But if these steps are, let's say, clear, I think that finding finance, you see, and good prices at this very moment is easy for blue carbon projects. So are the very, very, very first steps the ones that are very difficult. The feasibility, putting together all the, calculations of implementation costs, and most importantly, making sure that all the entities, national governments, sometimes there are some natural protected areas, entities, local governments, they all agree. Very important point, the benefit sharing. Benefit sharing, of course, tends to be a mess, and very few countries have rules on benefit sharing. Brazil is one case in which they have adopted a law on benefit sharing. Colombia has some kind of guidelines, but does not impose a percentage per se. So benefit sharing, yes, is super important, and the sooner you have it, the better, because that will make actually all actors involved, to continue with the project. I mean, very general what I'm saying, but, I cannot give you more details unless it's a specific project.
Thank you.
I have my own.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess it was mentioned, but the baseline is communities. First, because they have, I call we talk about the artificial intelligence, AI. I call it the ancestral intelligence, AI. It's the knowledge that communities have been gathering for hundreds of years. So they know what's going on in the territory. And this is something that we have found as scientists. You have to be humble and approach them of what they are. They are the ones that are in the territories. They are the ones who know what's going on, and they know what are the main needs and the main challenges they are facing following climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution. So to find out what are their insights and how you can help them, not replace them, it's the way of starting the projects. So I really look into that.
Thank you. I think it's a main message, like because of all the mess you, Mercedes, mentioned, and I think it's key, and we have to replicate this lesson learned in every project we work on from now on. Like, thank you, Captain, for that. I think we can now open the mic to all the participants that can ask any question to our panelists.
Hello, good morning. My name is Karen Niles. I'm the program coordinator for climate studies at the University of the West Indies. So spend my time thinking about climate change a lot. I have just two questions, but I'm not sure if we can ask questions to the person that presented virtually, if we can. I mean, if not, I'll just skip that one. So skip it? Okay, cool. So to the question for the gentleman from Colombia, what were the differences between implementation of blue carbon projects on the mainland of Colombia versus San Andres and the Catalina Islands, the small island developing states? Because I understand that in San Andres there's about 148 hectares of mangrove, and so I think that the differences between what you experience in the mainland versus what you experience in the small islands would probably be beneficial in our context.
Yes, thank you for the question. And yes, of course, the scale of implementing a project in a small island or the small islands as San Andres and Old Providence, it's really challenging. Not only because of the size, but the crucial importance of that small size to the island. So when you talk about our Pacific coast, for instance, it's 250,000 hectares of mangrove coverage. In San Andres and Old Providence, as you mentioned, it's very small. But the importance, it's so crucial for the communities, for the stability of the island. And as we saw from what Minister Correa presented, the extreme vulnerability of these two islands to the different impacts of the enhancing climate change impacts from hurricanes and different sea level rise, and it's amazing. So we have to work there in more detail in terms of data and more quickly, because time is running out. So we have to really move fast so we can recover what we have lost, especially in Providencia, and we have to find the ways to protect what we have now still healthy in San Andres and probably in the near future once we recover Providencia. So it's completely challenging, the scale in which we have to work. Even in our country, we have the islands in the Caribbean, we have the coast in the Caribbean, which is completely different, and the Pacific, in terms of not only the coverage, but the systems. You have tide changes in the Caribbean around 1 meter at the most. In our Pacific coast, it's 5-6 meters tide change. So that makes a huge difference in terms of how we calculate the capacity of these systems to store carbon, to get carbon, and of course, the relationship of this with the co-benefits of the local communities.
Hello. Thank you. My name is Juan Pablo from Colombia. My question is for Mercedes. Thank you so much for your presentation. You mentioned the reputation of the carbon projects, okay? And some projects with problems. Can you tell us what the main errors or problems are? And based on your knowledge of the topics of the carbon projects, and what your main recommendations are for avoiding these problems. Thank you.
Thank you. So, I mean, of course, this question would be naturally for Vera, right? But, I mean, I can answer it generally. So, exactly, there were, over the last years, actually, yeah, for the last mainly 4 years, many news in newspapers, in scientific literature, in social media, accusing certain projects, as I said before, of issuing more carbon credits than what actually the projects were generating. What the problem was, or who was to blame for that. Of course, in certain occasions, I'm not, let's say, going methodology per methodology or carbon standard per carbon standard, but in certain occasions, the problem was the methodology itself, right? How, let's say, the rules that the methodology use to count those emissions. Of course, you know, these methodologies are always work in progress, you see, and those methodologies started some years ago. They have to be improved, and as a result of those criticism, actually, many of those methodologies, okay, by carbon standards were reviewed, okay? And today we can say that, of course, methodologies are stronger, also because the academic sector, you see, has much more access to how those methodologies have been drafted and the, let's say, data they have been using. And as I said, those methodologies are a life animal, because they continuously revise themselves. On the other hand, there was another problem as well with environmental integrity of those carbon projects, and this came from the project developers. Of course, they follow, you see, the rules of the methodology, but at the same time, they were providing, in certain occasions, I'm not saying always, certain data which were not accurate, and they were just sampling, right? Of course, this didn't reflect the reality of the real carbon emissions that were avoided or sequestered. So how to avoid this? Of course, you know, being very conservative in establishing baselines, in how the additionality can be proved, as Vera mentioned before, how the leakage in the coastal projects, leakage is a very, very relevant issue, you see, because the coastline areas are not delimited, all right? Even in the Latin America region, in the Caribbean, you know, there are all these small islands countries that they're all together. So it might be, you know, at a certain point, you decide to advance with, you know, kind of a program of activities, many countries together. Why not? There are ideas. So, yes, there are different methods. The good thing is that right now we know more about what went wrong, and everybody's trying to address it. Everybody is trying to address those issues. I don't mean that, you know, they totally disappear, that all projects are, you know, from an integrity point of view, wonderful at this very moment. It's not the case, but still, we are improving.
sorry, just one point. One of the things that we actually found out was that Vera methodology for blue carbon was completely inexistent, to say it. So we actually went constructing the methodology with them. And this, I was joking with the guys of Vera, telling them, I'm going to charge some royalties because actually we've been helping you to refine the way of doing it. Of course, most of the approach was coming from the experience in continental forests. And so it's been a process. As I mentioned, when the system was created, mangroves and coastal ecosystem were considered producers of greenhouse gases. We were the bad guys. We were the ugly duck in this system. Now we have been able, from science and with the development of not only the experience of the scientists and the equipment, and this project here that we're now having with Stacy, it's a very good example of how methodologies and capacity building along the regions are the ones crucial to actually protect, let's call it, the legacy of blue carbon. And that's something that I think is very important to know. And it's still evolving. We are now having more experience, more data, more capacity to observe what are the possibilities of the coastal ecosystems. You've seen that now Vera people are moving into kelps and things of this kind. So there's a potential, and that's because we have now the capacity, the information, the experience to actually represent what blue carbon may play in this system, this market system that was designed in the Kyoto protocols.
Mercedes, Captain, thanks a lot. We really thank you for this insightful discussion. We ran out of time, sadly. And we will now break for lunch. Please be sure to check out the poster presentations outside of the room to learn more about some of the work being done in blue carbon. And yeah, we return at 1:15 for a panel discussion of bridging science, policy, and practice in blue carbon. Thanks again.